In a desolate, ruined landscape, a young man's face is contorted with rage. He glares at a blonde swordswoman, roaring a vow directly at his foe. Rufus lay lightless, that he will be the one to deliver the final blow. His vow goes unfulfilled. He lies slain upon the cracked stones, eyes staring blankly at the sky as the victorious swordswoman and a companion stand over his fallen body. His defeat is total. The situation is undeniably grim, a future he cannot escape. But the vision shatters. Rufus sits bolt upright in his bed, the memory of the battle still fresh. He reasons with himself that as the heir to the marquisate of Lightless, such a pathetic death is impossible. It is an outcome that must never happen. Driven by this premonition, he races from his room. His butler, Carlos, calls out, asking where he is going. Without stopping, Rufus shouts that they must hurry to Roguebelt. He has to stop this future from coming to pass. He pauses in the hallway, his expression hardening with resolve. If that nightmare has even the slightest chance of becoming reality, he vows to crush it completely, using everything at his disposal. The scene shifts to one day earlier. Within the opulent, lightless family manor, the young heir, Rufus lay lightless, sits pensively at a table. His personal butler, Carlos, approaches, remarking that a pout will ruin the boy's cute face. Rufus, annoyed, insists he's already 12 and demands Carlos quit the cute talk. The butler playfully retorts that cuteness is justice. Pushed to his limit, Rufus asks with a cold tone if Carlos would like this to be his last day alive. Carlos responds with perfect composure, stating that a servant's life lasts only as long as their master's will. Rufus then affirms his own conviction, declaring that he is always ready to lay down his own short life for his cause. To prove his maturity, Rufus declares that being called cute is disrespectful and points out that he even drinks black coffee. As he takes a sip, he privately appreciates the excellent aroma, recognizing the brewer's effort. From the doorway, Carlos watches his young master's performance with a knowing smile. He listened to his butler's dry remark, who wondered aloud who would brew the young master's coffee should he die, calling the prospect truly regrettable. After a brief pause, Rufus simply stated his butler's name. In response, Carlos declared with mock gravity that, out of mercy, he would allow his master to live a long life. The young noble affirmed this, vowing to do his utmost to live a long and humble life. He then chided his butler, stating that he'd nearly given him a heart attack first thing in the morning. Carlos calmly retorted that the young master had been the one to provoke him, adding that the last time he'd seen him this upset was when Rufus fired one of his magic instructors. The memory surfaced clearly. Rufus, with a dismissive wave, had yelled that the instructor was fired, finding it laughable that someone so bold would dare try to teach him. Back in the present moment, he conceded that the incident had indeed been quite recent. His butler's expression softened. Adjusting his tie, Carlos gently suggested that perhaps telling him the reason for his distress might ease his mind, even a little. A small, knowing smile touched the young master's lips. He told Carlos that he had asked for it, and warned him to prepare himself for a story that was neither cute nor amusing. The butler stood at attention, ready to listen as his young master prepared to speak. His story began with a simple, ominous statement, his voice echoing over the image of his coffee cup. He had experienced an endless and unpleasant dream. He recounted the tale from his dream. It began with a commoner boy who enrolled in a magic academy steeped in class discrimination. There, despite being scorned by arrogant noble students, he and his companions faced a crisis that threatened their entire world. The boy ultimately triumphed, defeating the demon lords and the dark god who orchestrated the chaos, thereby saving everyone. The hero's journey culminated in him marrying the princess of that kingdom, and he ascended the throne to become its king. As the tale concluded, Carlos stood with a gentle smile, his eyes glistening. He remarked that it was quite a story, filled with laughter and tears, much like a popular adventure novel. On the table, the young master's cup was now empty. His butler's emotional response did little to soothe the young master. Rufus, his face a mask of frustration, demanded coffee from Carlos, insisting that the dream he'd had was not entertaining in the slightest. He explained that he had been forced to sit through 5 entire chapters of a ridiculous commoner's rags-to-riches story. As Carlos served him, the butler acknowledged that his master had a point. The butler, however, began offering a literary critique, suggesting the story's pacing could be tightened and that the first 2 chapters showed too much empathy for the villain. He even added it would be more relatable to the masses. This infuriated Rufus, who retorted by asking if Carlos was his editor and telling him to try writing a book himself. His fist clenched tightly as he prepared to reveal the true reason for his anger. "Listen well," he commanded, explaining why the story had focused so much on the villain's point of view. He burst out that it was because he himself had been cast as a petty, insignificant villainous noble. Worse, he was killed off repeatedly in the most pathetic ways imaginable. Upon hearing this, Carlos looked on with clear amusement, asking what sort of wicked deeds his master had committed. Rufus began to recount his roles. In the first chapter, he was a villainous noble who simply mocked the protagonist for being a commoner. Carlos recalled the scene. He then specified that his role was even more minor. He was merely one of the main villain's lackeys, designated Lackey B. After that, he continued down the path of a minor villain. But in the second chapter, he reappeared as one of the 4 heavenly kings serving the second demon lord. His new identity was Shadow Wolf Rufus. Carlos was overcome with admiration, exclaiming that his master had an excellent sense for names. The butler stroked his chin, a smirk spreading across his face as he summarized the situation. The Shadow Wolf fought well, but met an unimpressive in midway through the chapter. He concluded that the young master was simply displeased at being cast as a villain who dies so early. His amusement was met with a sharp glare. Rufus's eyes narrowed as he delivered a quiet warning. You shouldn't be laughing either. He pointed a finger at his butler, explaining that since Carlos was merely the opening act in the dream, he had died even before Rufus did. With a flourish, he bestowed upon him the title Dark Butler Carlos, a name the butler accepted with a proud pose. The butler was moved to tears, covering his mouth as he expressed his sheer delight at the thought of protecting his young master, even within a dream. Rufus, however, flatly corrected him, stating that he hadn't been protected at all. They had both perished. With the matter settled, Carlos observed that his master's mood had improved and suggested they proceed with the day's schedule, to which Rufus simply agreed. As they prepared, Carlos outlined the plan for the day from the Grand Manor. Herbology practice in the garden that morning, followed by a lecture on economics in the afternoon. While heading to the garden, their path was suddenly obstructed by a massive, fallen tree. Rufus questioned the sight, and Carlos explained it was simply an old tree that had finally given way, blocking the path with remarkable neatness. A group of servants and gardeners were already gathered at the obstruction, their attention turning towards the young lord as he arrived. One of them asked the gardener what was happening. One of the gardeners stepped forward to explain the situation, informing Rufus that it would take a considerable amount of time to dismantle and move the tree. He suggested that the young master would have to take a detour through the woods, warning that his clothes might get dirty. The word detour seemed to strike a nerve. Rufus's gaze hardened as he informed the startled gardener that the value of time for a noble such as himself was vastly different from that of a commoner. Without another word, he leaped into the air, shouting a warning for the others to stand back. A shadowy, immense blade materialized in his grasp as he invoked its name. Dark Side, the shadowy weapon descended with incredible force, instantly obliterating the massive tree and sending splinters flying in every direction. He and Carlos walk away through a stone archway, leaving the servants behind. Two of the maids watched them depart, one remarking on the incredible magic he displayed, though she couldn't help but notice his arrogant demeanor. As they watch, the gardener approaches the maids, telling the one with her hair in buns that she is still a rookie. When she looks confused, he simply directs her gaze downward. Following his direction, they see that the massive tree has been perfectly sectioned into uniform, firewood-sized logs. The servants are stunned, realizing he performed the feat not just for show, but to make their cleanup and reuse of the wood incredibly efficient. The gardener remarks that their lord is a difficult man to understand before ordering everyone to quickly haul the wood away. Meanwhile, as they walk along a stone path, Carlos gently advises his young master to perhaps show a bit more leniency when dealing with the commoners. Rufus counters, questioning if he hadn't just made their work significantly faster. Carlos clarifies that this was not quite what he was referring to. The butler's words bring to mind a memory of a training session for the estate servants. In it, Carlos had explained to them that while the young master may seem arrogant and fixated on efficiency, he is, in truth, still just a boy. He had warned them, however, that such an attitude could easily earn him resentment from others. Returning to the present, he scoffs at the notion, declaring that he would never coddle them. He asserts that showing any softness to commoners would only invite them to take immediate advantage. Beside him, Carlos lets out a weary sigh. His conviction is absolute, rooted in a core belief. The duty of a noble is to protect the family name and ensure the prosperity of their land. This is why he dedicates himself so completely. While commoners toil for their living, he, as the heir to the marquisate, must study relentlessly to fulfill his noble duties. His training is all-encompassing, covering not only rhetoric, language, and martial arts, but also the complexities of economics, magic, and tedious practical etiquette. It is this deep-seated belief in duty and preparation that fuels his disgust for a certain kind of story. He internally questions what a mere commoner, possessing nothing but brute strength, could possibly contribute to saving the world. As night falls, a strange, dark particulate, like ash or countless black feathers, begins to drift down from the sky, blanketing the estate in an ominous shroud. In his chambers, a young Rufus stands before a window, clad in a simple robe. The night outside does little to soothe his thoughts as he reflects on a prophetic dream that continues to bother him. He kept the details from his butler, Carlos, but the vision was far too vast and detailed to be dismissed as a mere dream. His reflection in the glass shows not his current self, but the man he is to become. His mind drifts back to the contents of that story, a ridiculous tale set in the kingdom of Centuria, where a commoner rises to become ruler. He recalls specific characters, including one who calls himself the Second Demon Lord, Raymond Roy Noden's Galleon, and even recognizes the names of the 4 heavenly kings who served under him. Sitting up in his bed, he puzzles over the name Raymond. Though he has never met the man, he knows he is supposed to be the son of a duke. He questions why such a person would claim to be a demon lord, and more disturbingly, why he himself would end up submitting to him in the story. He lies back down, his thoughts racing. He wonders what, if anything, could possibly change for him once he enters the academy. As his eyes close, a single, unsettling question hangs in his mind. Just what is going on? Suddenly, the scene shifts. A young man with spiky hair screams his name, demanding to know if there was another way, questioning a sacrifice that had been made. The perspective snaps to a sharp, focused eye, and a realization dawns. This is the protagonist from yesterday's dream. The world around him is one of ruin, a field of broken pillars under a gray sky. He recognizes it instantly. It's a different viewpoint, but this is the same moment, the same scene as the end of the dream. He is now his older self, the shadow wolf Rufus. With a look of utter disgust, he pushes someone away, shouting for the commoner not to come near him. The jarring reality hits him. He is living the dream right now. He realizes that at this rate, he will die just as he did in the dream. Refusing to accept this fate, he prepares a dark ball spell, convinced that his future self could not be killed by something so weak. But then, something is wrong. The protagonist looks on in shock, his mana rapidly depleting before the battle can even begin. Within a fractured memory, Rufus lay lightless parries a blow from a blonde swordswoman. He internally seethes with frustration, questioning why he must feign composure and wondering if the persona of the Shadow Wolf is nothing but an idiotic charade. The battlefield comes into view, identifying the combatants. Shadow Wolf, a young man named Abel, and the swordwoman, Farathiana. Her gaze is sharp and unwavering, her entire being focused on the coming strike as a faint aura surrounds her. She lunges, shouting Rufus's full name and vowing to be the one to kill him. He finds himself frozen, unable to even defend himself. As she closes in, her expression twists with rage and confusion. She screams at him to stop, insisting that she doesn't even know him. His forced composure shatters, replaced by raw, primal fear. A single thought consumes him. He does not want to die. The scene dissolves, and the pain becomes real for Abel. He clutches his head, crying out as the phantom agony courses through him. He questions how this can be happening in a dream, then looks on with a pained expression, wondering if Rufus had any other choice. Another memory surfaces. Abel stands opposite Rufus, warning him to stay back. Rufus recognizes the scenario, but notes that the opening move is different this time. He calmly summons a massive dark scythe, declaring that this encounter ends now. The result of that confrontation is agony. Abel screams, his body engulfed in dark flames. The heat is unbearable, the smell of his own burning flesh filling his senses as a voice roars for the Shadow Wolf to die. The memory replays from a different angle. Abel recalls the moment as the absolute worst, again questioning Rufus's path. This time, the cause of death is different, but just as painful. Rufus is struck down by wind magic, and with his last breath, he curses humanity as traitors he will never forgive. Yet another scene of defeat unfolds. Rufus is surrounded by female warriors. One accuses him of being responsible for someone named Norn. Another condemns him for torturing a village with heavy taxes. Wounded and resigned, Rufus admits he doesn't know who Norn is. He thinks of the woman who invested in him only to repeatedly try and kill him, and grimly tells his executioners to finish it quickly. He found the entire cycle utterly ridiculous. No matter how many times the dream repeated, the Shadow Wolf was always defeated. He wondered why he had to wait for his turn, feeling as if he were in some kind of card game, and mused that his dream self should have a healing potion. He questioned if there was another way, silently warning some unseen summoner to stay away, feeling suffocated by their presence. His frustration stemmed from the memory of the onslaught. Surrounded, he was assailed by insults. Nice robe, loser. They jeered, calling him a creep with strange eyes. But their words were just meaningless noise to him. As he fell, he began to lose all sense of reason, questioning if he was the one who was wrong, no longer knowing anything for certain. As Rufus's consciousness faded in the memory, the psychic backlash slammed into Abel. He cried out, clutching his head, begging for the repetitions to stop. He felt his body and soul being crushed down to the smallest grain of dust. In a vision, Rufus's phantom grabbed him, demanding to know what he wanted from him. The overwhelming sensation left him curled on the ground, helpless against the torrent of another's pain. Then, another voice from the memories cut through the chaos, its owner's booted feet standing firm. "Let me count," it declared. The subject of the count was clear: shadows. The final tally was staggering: 20,802,001. The sheer scale of the number seemed to warp reality itself, a blur of incomprehensible loss stretching into infinity. The weight of that number, of all those deaths, settled upon him as his eyes fluttered open. Lying in bed, he stared blankly at the ceiling, his gaze empty and exhausted, a simple choker around his neck. He awoke not in darkness, but within the familiar walls of his family's grand estate, the morning light filtering through the clouds. The return to consciousness was a violent one. He tumbled from his bed, crashing to the floor of his opulent room with a pained cry. His body ached, his mind a fog of terror. With a trembling hand, he pushed himself up, his voice a weak whisper as he called out for someone. His call was answered. The door burst open and his butler, Carlos, rushed to his side, his face etched with concern. From the doorway, another young man watched the scene unfold. Staring at the familiar face, the boy needed confirmation, his voice trembling as he asked if it was truly Carlos. The butler knelt, his expression softening with reassurance. He confirmed his identity, stating that he, Carlos, his personal butler, was right there. The confirmation was all it took. The boy's composure shattered, and a wave of anguish washed over his face. The anguish erupted into a raw, desperate wail. He screamed his butler's name, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his remembered horrors came crashing down. He lunged forward, burying his face in Carlos's uniform, his small hands clutching the fabric. "I don't want to die anymore," he sobbed, the plea torn from his throat, a desperate cry against a fate he had endured countless times. An hour passed. The storm of tears subsided, leaving a fragile calm. Carlos held the boy, who was now just sniffling softly, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of his terror. The butler's expression was one of deep pity for his young master. He pressed his face deeper into the butler's chest, inhaling deeply. The sudden movement and the sound of sniffing startled Carlos. Pulling back slightly, the boy looked up at his butler with a newfound clarity in his eyes. He stated simply that Carlos smelled of smoke. Carlos, the butler, appears flustered, his face damp. He mutters to himself in embarrassment that he was used as a handkerchief, and before his work hours had even begun. His young master, Rufus, now appearing as a young adult, watches him with a faint, knowing smile. He commends Carlos for his loyalty, noting that he would rush to his side even when off-duty if he showed any sign of distress. The butler, observing him, thinks to himself that Rufus seems to have recovered. He continues speaking, explaining that seeing Rufus, who is always so full of confidence, be so shaken has startled the other servants of the manor as well. As if to prove his point, two maids are seen peeking at Rufus from behind a partially open door down the hall. His attention snaps to them, and he shouts in embarrassment for them to get back to work. The maids apologize and quickly withdraw, one thinking his reddened nose is adorable, while the other wishes she could comfort him. Rufus then quietly reflects that it's fortunate his parents are away, as his crying was likely loud enough to be heard throughout the mansion. He turns away from Carlos and walks toward his bedroom, dismissing the entire affair. He insists it was nothing, that it wasn't funny, and that he simply had a nightmare. The butler follows him to the doorway, remarking that having nightmares 2 nights in a row is quite unfortunate. Standing by his bed, Rufus quietly affirms yes. But the one truly experiencing the event realizes it was far more than a nightmare. It was an ordeal of countless deaths, an endless pain that nearly caused him to lose his very sense of self. Back in the room, Carlos places a steadying hand on Rufus's shoulder. He tells him that what he endured cannot be called a dream. With a hardened expression, Rufus agrees, clarifying that it was an experience. His hands clench the fabric of his robe, a silent testament to the weight of that word. He stands still as Carlos adjusts his formal attire, his mind consumed by a chilling thought. If that experience, his death, were to become reality. But he immediately rejects this grim possibility, declaring that he has no obligation to follow the path laid out in that story. His expression hardens with resolve. Rather than obey such a pitiful ending, he will fight it, no matter how disgraceful his struggle might appear. He begins to analyze the events of the vision, questioning the variables. Could he have won if he'd had enough mana? Would the outcome have been different if he hadn't been a villainous noble, or one of the 4 heavenly kings he was forced to fight? As he ponders these hypotheticals, Carlos provides a crucial piece of information. The story is set to begin in 3 years, when its characters enter the Magic Academy. Rufus considers if simply avoiding the protagonist would be enough to escape his fate, but quickly dismisses the idea as too simple. His mind flashes back to another detail from the vision, a female sailor who commanded a water spirit. She had screamed at him, accusing the lightless family of torturing her village with heavy taxes. The woman's words echo in his memory, a clear motive for her actions. She held a deep grudge against him. The thought lingers as he sits at the table. He takes a sip from his cup, calling out to his butler. Heavy taxes, he muses aloud. Carlos approaches, inquiring if the warm milk was not to his liking. The young master is taken aback by the butler's perception, exclaiming, "Milk, you say?" He realizes Carlos is correct. Setting aside his surprise, he gives Carlos a direct order. He wants to know if any villages in the lightless territory are suffering under heavy taxes. Carlos agrees to investigate, but notes that their domain's taxes are not particularly high compared to others. Rufus sighs, momentarily annoyed at being treated like a child. He sat in contemplation, recalling a specific detail from the story of his future. It concerned taxes and a fishing village, one so harassed by rampaging sea monsters that it had lost its catch and could no longer pay its dues. As he mechanically cut into his meal, a thought crystallized: the village's name. If he could remember it, that name could be the key linking his dreadful dream to reality. He struggled to grasp the memory, muttering fragments under his breath. Rogue Belt. His butler, Carlos, having overheard, questioned the name. Rogue Belt? He asked, confirming that it was indeed a tiny fishing village located within the lightless family's territory. The confirmation struck him like lightning. His eyes widened in shock, and a manic grin spread across his face as the truth sank in. The fishing village of Rogue Belt actually existed. Carlos, perplexed, wondered aloud why he would be concerned with the taxes of such a small place. The moment of intensity passed, leaving Rufus staring at his plate. He had felt as though he were grasping at clouds, with only a dream as a clue. Seeing his strange behavior, Carlos expressed concern, asking if he was unwell and offering to reschedule his plans for the day. But Rufus knew this was more than just a dream. If a village name he couldn't possibly have known matched reality, then the future he had witnessed, the future where he dies, was starting to feel all too real. This terrifying realization spurred him into action. He shot up from his seat and rushed past his butler, shouting for Carlos. He declared that they were heading to Rogue Belt at once. As he hurried down the stairs, Carlos scrambled to intercept him, pleading for him to wait. The butler insisted the idea was unreasonable, listing the necessities for such a journey: a coachman, guards, and, most importantly, permission from Lord Lightless. Rufus dismissed his concerns, stating he would report to his father himself afterward. He ordered Carlos to serve as both coachman and guard. Knowing he couldn't explain the real reason without being dismissed as ill, he pushed forward. Carlos protested vehemently, insisting he must at least inform the Lord, but Rufus was already gone, shouting his butler's name with urgency. He looked back at his butler, declaring a sudden craving for fresh fish, effective immediately. The excuse was thin, but Carlos, recognizing he had overstepped his bounds, bowed his head in acquiescence. He promised to prepare for the trip at once. With a simple command, Rufus dismissed him to the task. As his butler walked away down the long, shadowed hall, a dark resolve hardened within Rufus. He considered his life, and everything in his possession, to be his alone. No one, not even a god, would be forgiven for taking what was his without permission. A grim realization followed this thought. His own death, as foreseen in the vision, would also mean the death of Carlos. His expression set like stone, a fierce determination burning in his eyes. He would not be a passive victim. He vowed to strike first against fate, even if only by a single second, to rewrite the future and prevent his own demise. Rufus had a dream, though he considered it less a dream and more of a prophetic tale. According to this vision, in 3 years' time, he would die disgracefully at the hands of commoners. Unwilling to sit by and do nothing for 3 years, he resolved to change his own future, setting out on a 4-day carriage journey to the frontier village of Rogue Belt. As his journey progressed, he noticed something strange in the air. It smelled of the sea. He and his butler, Carlos, walked along a cliffside path overlooking the water, their carriage laden with supplies following close behind. Carlos stopped and consulted a large map, confirming their location. This, he stated, was Rogue Belt, or so the map indicated. Before them lay their destination, the frontier fishing village of Rogue Belt, a small settlement nestled against the shore at the base of towering cliffs. Upon entering the village streets, Rufus was struck by an unsettling quiet. There were far too few people around. He recalled the Rogue Belt from his vision. In that story, the village was exhausted by heavy taxes, but there were definitely more people than this. His mind replayed a key event from the prophecy. The story's protagonist visits this very village to slay sea monsters, and it is here he meets a woman who joins his crew. The memory sharpened, and he recognized her with a jolt. It was none other than that crazy woman sailor who was the first to take his head in his vision of the future. Standing in the empty street, his resolve hardened. He understood now that Rogue Belt was a critical point of contact between the story and reality. He could not go back empty-handed. He found himself thinking about food, specifically fish, as his butler, Carlos, pointed out an inn. Carlos gently reminded the young master that he was breaking character, a comment that seemed to pull Rufus from his reverie. Following his butler's lead, they approached the establishment. Rufus dryly commented that all the buildings looked like doghouses to him, but acknowledged Carlos's find. Inside, the inn was silent and empty, save for a man slumped over the wooden counter, fast asleep. Carlos announced their presence, and the man began to stir with a groan. The innkeeper awoke with a start, immediately hostile. He mistook them for debt collectors, shouting that there was nothing left in his shop. Carlos, ever poised, apologized for the intrusion and clarified that his master simply had some questions for the owner. The innkeeper looked on, bewildered by the term. His eyes then fell upon Rufus. The man scoffed, calling the boy a brat and questioning why they would let a child like him run around. In response to the insult, Carlos's demeanor shifted to one of immense pride. He presented the young Rufus with a flourish, declaring that his master was a fine person, worthy of service. The butler then leaned in to quietly tell Rufus that this was the nature of untrained commoners. The innkeeper, overhearing the remark, shot back that Carlos had a slave's mentality. Rufus simply acknowledged that he understood. Changing the subject, Carlos formally requested information about the village's desolate state. The innkeeper hesitated, stating that such information came at a price. With a knowing smirk, Rufus produced a heavy pouch of coins, coolly observing that the man was a slave to money. The innkeeper's face contorted with rage at the boy's sharp-tongued accusation. Before the man could erupt, a young woman rushed from a back room, pleading for her father to stop. The innkeeper's anger turned to shock as he saw her, calling out her name, Lilia, and demanding to know why she wasn't hidden as he had instructed. She throws herself onto the wooden floor, bowing so low her forehead nearly touches the planks. In a trembling voice, she desperately apologizes for her father's rudeness, pleading for forgiveness on their behalf. Her desperate apology is met with fury from her father, who shouts from behind the bar that she must not bow to them. Lilia, still prostrate, insists that he should bow too, explaining that these visitors are different from the usual ones. The suddenness of her bow makes a soft popping sound. Carlos, flustered, addresses her as young lady, while Rufus coolly observes the farce, wondering if their words are even being heard. In response to the chaos, Rufus steps forward. He calmly places his polished boot on the back of Lilia's head, pressing her face firmly into the floorboards. The act stuns Carlos and the innkeeper into silence. At that moment, the inn door bursts open and a group of concerned villagers, armed with farming tools, rush in, demanding to know what the shouting is about. Their eyes fall upon the scene, and one cries out Lilia's name in alarm. The villagers, led by the innkeeper, completely misread the situation. One shouts that the depraved old bastard is trying to make Lilia lick his boots, while another notes that the old man, the innkeeper, is also armed. Rufus simply looks on, confused by the accusation. The innkeeper's eyes widen in sheer disbelief. He is a fiend, an ogre. He stammers that he would never do such a thing. He points frantically past the pair, shouting that he is merely the lackey. The real boss, he declares, is the short one. The other villagers react with stunned silence. Rufus pinches the bridge of his nose, a headache blooming from the sheer absurdity. He wonders if he's surrounded by short-sighted idiots. The villagers, their anger now directed at him, shout that they won't go easy on a kid and accuse him of being a goon sent by someone named Clinton. He processes their words, his mind making a crucial connection. Robelt's local magistrate. He concludes it must be Clinton F.A. Serpent. The name triggers a jarring memory from the dream story. He recalls with sudden clarity that Robelt's magistrate had imposed reckless taxes, making the people suffer. It was the backlash from those misdeeds that led to him being hated and killed. With this new understanding, he addresses the crowd with renewed purpose. He demands they bring him someone who can speak like a human and tell him everything about this Clinton. His commanding tone only serves to further enrage the villagers. One of them seethes, calling him an arrogant brat. Amidst the angry murmurs, one large man in the crowd observes Rufus's confident bearing. A realization dawns on him. This boy is probably a real noble. This man, Greg, steps forward with a placating grin. He calls out to the others, warning them that if they lay a hand on the boy, they will surely lose their heads. The muscular man addresses the newcomers with a confident smirk, noting their noble status yet lack of courtesy. He offers a proposition. He will ensure their safety from his men if they, in turn, release Lilia. He offers a belated apology and introduces himself as Greg, the head of the sailors. Rufus observes him keenly, noting his cautious posture, body half-turned, hand never straying from his sword's hilt, and his gaze fixed on the butler, Carlos. His butler, Carlos, assesses the man. He inwardly acknowledges Greg's rudeness, but respects his caution, concluding that a proper conversation might now be possible. Rufus, too, remains vigilant, his eyes tracking Greg's hand resting on his weapon. In response to the demand, Rufus states plainly that he was never restraining the girl to begin with. Lilia, who had been bowing low in terror, lets out a small yelp of surprise at his words. He then turns to the startled Lilia and calmly asks for her left hand. As she nervously complies, the touch triggers a vivid memory for Rufus, a vision of himself as a young boy, taking the hand of a much younger Lilia. The memory deepens, transporting him to a grand ball from their childhood. He sees himself dancing with Lilia, while a younger Greg and other villagers watch. He recalls Greg's past assessment, that while he was aloof, he was a proper gentleman. The recollection snaps back to the present, where Greg clutches his head in exasperation, declaring Rufus to be insufferable. Lilia stands beside him, a gentle smile on her face as the other villagers look on in confusion. Despite his frustration, the sailor grins, acknowledging that he can see no hostility from Rufus towards him or his people. For his part, Rufus simply concludes that stirring up trouble and wiping out an entire village would be too much of a hassle. Rufus Lightless correctly identifies the tense situation, commoners surrounding a noble with open hostility. Opposite him, the villager Greg wears a challenging smirk, his eyes narrowed. He calmly explains the law of the kingdom. To resort to violence against nobility is not merely disrespect, but treason. Such a crime is punished by the execution of the criminals along with their entire families. Greg scoffs at this law, sarcastically impressed. He asks if shedding tears and bowing in gratitude for mercy would be enough to satisfy the young noble. Rufus replies curtly that while Greg's head has no value, it is still a head, and he ought to bow it anyway. The command leaves the large man momentarily speechless. The villager recovers with a laugh, slapping his forehead in disbelief. He admits he doesn't know what kind of noble Rufus is, but declares he is nothing like a man named Clinton. He seems genuinely surprised that a simple bow is all that's being demanded. At the mention of this name, Rufus's demeanor shifts. He clarifies that he does, in fact, have a demand. Before their conversation is interrupted, he wants Greg to tell him about Clinton, Robelt's local magistrate. He steps forward, his question sharp and direct. Are the villagers on bad terms with the magistrate? Greg reacts with utter disbelief, as if the answer should be obvious. Greg's expression hardens into fury. He roars that if Clinton ever shows his face in the village again, they will all put their lives on the line to kill him. Rufus observes this outburst coolly, remarking that they are past being mere commoners and have become barbarians. Greg does not disagree. He continues, his voice laced with bitterness, explaining that Clinton allows his men to pillage the village under the guise of tax collection. When there is nothing left to take, he resorts to kidnapping. Greg asks rhetorically if that isn't savage enough to be a match for their own barbarism. His words hang in the air, followed by a moment of grim, heavy silence. The tense moment is broken by a woman's voice shouting Greg's name. He turns away from Rufus, waving a hand as if embarrassed. "Whoops," he says, acknowledging that it wasn't the kind of talk to have in front of a child before heading up the stairs. His tense conversation with the villagers is shattered by a young man bursting in with a warning. Clinton's goons have arrived. As Greg prepares to face them, he instructs the old man, Carlos, to protect Rufus if the weapon on his belt is functional. With a grim look, Greg heads into the fray. The sudden danger brings to mind his recent exchange. Greg had scoffed at the idea of taking their petition directly to the Lord. In response, Rufus had coolly suggested that if they were prepared to lay down their lives, they should try petitioning House Lightless directly. He knows Greg does not truly understand the stakes. Standing beside Carlos, Rufus reflects on a harsh truth. Ignorance is a crime. Below this thought, a vision of countless bodies illustrates the brutal consequences of such naivete. The grim reality outside unfolds just as predicted. The ringleader of Clinton's men bellows his orders: seize all valuables and kill anyone who resists. From the crowd, Greg roars back in defiance, dismissing the demand as nonsense. His defiance is met with immediate violence. The goons descend upon the villagers, brutally striking down those who protest. One man, insisting he has nothing left to give, is punched mercilessly by a soldier who asks if he still has blood to spare. Observing the chaos from a nearby window, Rufus calmly turns to his butler. He asks Carlos if he recalls the law stating that forced collection must follow proper procedures. Carlos affirms this, stating that what they are witnessing is not a tax collection, but merely an act of robbery. Their quiet analysis is violently interrupted as the door to their room is kicked open with a resounding crash. Elsewhere in the inn, the source of the commotion becomes clear. A goon has discovered Lilia hiding and calls out to his captain. Her father, the innkeeper, desperately offers up the family silver, pleading for them to leave his daughter alone as she cries out for him to run. The sounds of terror seem to sharpen his focus. With a pensive expression, Rufus leans his head on his hand and begins to pose a question to his butler, starting with a single word: hypothetically. Inside the ransacked inn, Carlos considers the situation. He asks if it would be possible for him to deal with Clinton personally, but immediately concedes that it would require the Lord's permission. From a window above, young Rufus observes the scene. He reflects that if he, the heir, were to act on his own, it could be misconstrued as blaming the Lord for appointing the official in the first place. His butler approaches him from behind, addressing him as young master. Carlos advises that the proper course is to gather evidence, submit a report, and then take appropriate measures. Carlos internally expresses pride, noting that the next head of House Lightless can already distinguish between rashness and orderly governance. The situation below deteriorates, however, as one of Clinton's goons spots Lilia and shouts for his men to forget the old man and strip them of their valuables. The goon grabs Lilia, declaring he'll inspect her himself to see if she's sellable. As she screams for help, Rufus trembles with suppressed fury. Stepping forward with resolve, Carlos announces that he will handle this himself. He positions himself between Rufus and the intruders, ordering the knave to back off. Carlos declares that his young master is a person so exalted that for mere bandits to even approach him is an act of presumption. The goon bristles at being called a bandit. Carlos coolly replies that if they are not bandits, they are simply vermin. From behind him, Rufus realizes with a start that his butler is intentionally provoking them. His taunt works. An armored goon charges forward, sword raised, shouting that the dark nobles are the ones backing them. The blade connects, striking Carlos across the face. The goon questions his insolence, reminding him that House Lightless is behind their actions. As Carlos stumbles back, Rufus watches in horror, realizing his butler has truly put his own body on the line. He stands stunned, touching a finger to his cheek. He looks at the blood on his fingertip, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Blood, he thinks. I have been cut. He looks up from the ground where he has fallen, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth, and calmly states, I see. Young Master Rufus's expression twists into a cold, menacing smile. He addresses the goons, his voice dangerously low, accusing them of wounding his faithful servant and, on top of that, sullying the name of Lightless. He declares their actions are excuse enough to crush Clinton. As he speaks, a massive, shadowy hand erupts from the ground, its dark fingers closing around one of the armored men. Rufus names the technique Dark Hand and adds that they might as well deal with the rest while they are at it. The shadowy appendage violently hurls the captured goon through the wall of a nearby building. His comrades cry out his name in shock as he is sent flying. Having crashed outside, the enraged captain gets to his feet and bellows an order to the men still in the street. Kill those two. Moments later, walking away from the ensuing brawl, Rufus remarks to his butler that it was quite an entertaining little performance. Carlos, walking beside him, replies simply, I am honored. He then asks the young master if they should finish them all off. Rufus, with a slight smile, instructs him to keep it moderate. Meanwhile, back in the street, Greg lands a solid punch on one of the goons, who cries out as the blow connects. From a high vantage point, Rufus explains his reasoning. He notes that with savages on both sides, it's impossible to tell them apart, and they cannot risk hitting villagers by mistake. Carlos acknowledges the order. As you wish. The battle unfolds below. Two armored knights engage the goons with disciplined strikes while Greg continues his bare-fisted assault. High above on a rooftop, Carlos watches the controlled chaos, his expression focused and grim. Carlos moves with surprising speed, ducking under a clumsy sword swing as he sends another armored soldier sprawling. He unleashes a whirlwind of force, a single, powerful sweep of his arm that blasts through the ranks of the private soldiers, scattering them like leaves in a storm. In the quiet that follows, the alley is littered with the unconscious forms of Clinton's men. Greg, standing amidst the defeated squad, can only stare in disbelief, marveling that the old man managed such a feat alone. He wonders what kind of man could possess such power. Carlos turns to the young master Rufus, who has been observing nearby, and offers an apology for the crude display of violence. The boy, however, simply states that he does not mind at all. He looks on with admiration, a small smile playing on his lips. He reflects on his butler's past as the former captain of the Dark Knights of House Lightless, recognizing that even with age, Carlos's skill remains formidable. Meanwhile, Greg urgently orders the last of the retreating soldiers to fall back. He roars for them to carry a message back to their master, Clinton. His defiance ignites the crowd of villagers, who raise their tools and fists in unified agreement. Greg declares they will no longer be oppressed and will take their grievances directly to the Lord. Watching from the sidelines, Rufus smirks, privately noting that such a direct appeal is a complicated matter. As the determined villagers march off, Carlos questions the young master about letting the soldiers escape. Rufus affirms the decision, explaining that their own destination is now Clinton's manor. He stands beside a waiting carriage, his expression sharp and calculating. The villagers' march, he notes, conveniently simplifies their own plans. He stood by the coast, gazing out at the water when a strange, swirling vortex formed in the sky above. A sudden, unsettling feeling washed over him, causing him to question its origin. The sensation intensified. He recognized it as a magic wave, a powerful force that felt like it was dragging him down to the bottom of the sea. He recalled hearing a sound from the water, and a dreadful realization dawned on him as his eyes widened in shock. It couldn't be that thing. His mind raced, connecting the disturbance to a specific event, the appearance of a sea monster, an event that was not supposed to happen for another 3 years. He wondered grimly if his attempts to change the future, armed with his foreknowledge, had inadvertently caused this premature arrival. As if in answer to his fears, a colossal form began to surface from the depths. It was one of the Demon King's dreaded vassal beasts, the sea demon, Stray. A voice calls out from the darkness, questioning. The young master, Rufus, stands alone on a grassy bluff, his long coat fluttering in the wind as he gazes out at the vast sea before him. Inside a carriage, his butler Carlos observes him with a knowing smile, asking if he is feeling reluctant to leave the sea behind, or perhaps if he is simply craving some exotic cuisine. He reflects on the journey, realizing that Carlos couldn't sense the unsettling wave of magic from earlier. Rufus dismisses him as a carefree fool and vows to never return to this town. Elsewhere, a subordinate confirms they are heading to Clinton's residence and that he will gather evidence to deliver personally. With a confident smirk, Rufus sits with his arms crossed, anticipating the confrontation. He thinks of his target, Clinton F.E.U. Serpent, and wonders what kind of excuse the man will try to invent this time. Arriving at the Clinton estate in Viperport Harbor Town, he takes a seat in an opulent room. His expression sours with disdain as a single thought crosses his mind. This is absolutely boring. His internal monologue continues as he sits alone on the grand sofa. He considers the accusations, defaming the noble name of House Lightless, and even resorting to looting. He feigns ignorance, thinking to himself that he knows nothing of such things. In response, the local magistrate, Clinton F.E.U. Serpent, appears with a dismissive gesture and an oily smile. He claims the incident must have been carried out by tax collectors on site without permission, and eagerly promises to find them and bring their heads to Rufus immediately. Rufus internally scoffs at the polished excuse, thinking that sacrificing subordinates is a lizard's trick, not fitting for a slithery snake like Clinton. Out loud, he cuts to the heart of the matter, demanding to know why tax collection is falling behind. He presses the matter, commanding Clinton to speak plainly. Across from him, the magistrate leans back with a condescending air, beginning his explanation by claiming that the peasants' excuses are simply absurd beyond belief. He listened as Clinton F.E.U. Serpent began his explanation, claiming the villagers' fishing has declined because of a mass outbreak of sea monsters, leaving them with no goods to pay their taxes. As he spoke, the magistrate crossed his arms with an air of dismissive confidence. The explanation struck Rufus with a jolt. He realized that Robelt suffering from poor fishing due to monsters was the exact same situation as in the story he knew. A chilling thought followed. This wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 years. He remained silent, lost in thought, as Clinton continued, remarking with skepticism that he had never heard of a mass monster outbreak occurring outside of a dungeon. His mind raced. The future events were already taking place, and he understood with stark clarity that the fate of that village was now directly tied to his own survival. He had a focus. He recalled the details from the story, remembering how the heroes had reacted when they learned of the monster outbreak. If events were unfolding as they had in the tale, then the culprit was the colossal demon kraken, Strafe, a beast that had rampaged off the coast of Robelt and had proven a difficult foe even for the two protagonists. The memory of the method used to finally take it down flashed through his mind. A powerful, decisive strike. It all boiled down to one thing: massive armament. In short, it required an immense amount of money. He knew that in the original story, the king's support during the revival of the demon lords had made it possible. But in this case, he would have to gather the money himself. He hears the sound of a door opening, followed by a familiar voice announcing, "I've returned, young master." The man who entered is Carlos, but he is not addressing Rufus. Instead, he speaks to another man with a goatee, informing him that he has obtained the requested items. Before he can continue detailing the situation in the next room and the basement below, where two figures are held in chains, the man with the goatee cuts him off. He chides Carlos for being late, stressing that they can't waste any more time. Rufus, standing nearby, overhears the entire exchange. He listens intently, his expression unreadable as he brings a gloved hand to his chin. The information about captives in the basement and the urgency in the men's voices swirls in his mind. A slow, knowing smile spreads across his face. A plan is forming. Inside a lavishly decorated room, the young Rufus Lightless sits calmly on a sofa, addressing the local magistrate, Clinton. He remarks that while everything has been dull so far, it is about to become interesting. A flustered Clinton stammers in response. He elaborates, coolly listing Clinton's crimes: unauthorized taxation, embezzlement, looting, and kidnapping. Rufus states that his servant has just secured evidence of all these transgressions, causing both Clinton and his goateed associate to react with visible shock. Despite the accusations, Clinton's panic quickly subsides, replaced by a smug grin. He thinks to himself that this level of exposure was within his expectations. As long as he has that money, he is confident he can recover from the setback. His confidence is immediately challenged. Rufus reveals knowledge of a stash of illicit funds hidden in the basement, including solid gold statues. He then pointedly asks if Clinton would mind if he took custody of everything underground. The magistrate, now sweating and panicked, stammers that he knows nothing of such things. The magistrate's composure shatters completely. A bead of sweat drips down his temple as his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated panic. His panic gives way to a surge of possessive rage as the reality of the situation sinks in. He grits his teeth, thinking of the hard-earned savings he had accumulated through so much effort. He refuses to accept this outcome. With a snarl twisting his features, Clinton furiously declares that he will never let some brat steal his fortune. His outburst echoes through the room, his arm outstretched in a commanding gesture. Rufus remains seated, completely unfazed, while his butler, Carlos, stand impassively behind him. Unmoved, Rufus turns his attention to the goateed man, politely asking about the hand he has raised. He then calmly turns his head, asking, "Well, Carlos?" and inquiring about the armed men in the next room. The answer is revealed in the adjacent room, where a dozen of Clinton's armed staff lie unconscious on the floor. Rufus explains that they are all fast asleep. With a chilling smile, he informs the goateed man that this was a clear attempt to assassinate a high noble, an act of insolence for which he could be executed on the spot. His cold pronouncement sent a wave of terror through Clinton, whose face contorted in fear. A single tear mixed with sweat as the magistrate grappled with the sudden, stark reality. He was going to die. The magistrate immediately fell to his knees, groveling and offering to surrender all his wealth and treasures in exchange for mercy. The goatee man, standing beside Rufus's chair, rebuked him sharply, declaring that House Lightless could not be swayed by mere bribes. He, however, paid the outburst no mind, his thoughts already elsewhere. With Clinton's fortune, the matter of funds was settled. The next step was to procure arms. He knew that arms trading was heavily restricted by the crown, but a man like Clinton, who had been trafficking loot and humans for gold, would surely have black market connections. A new possibility emerged. Perhaps this man could still be of use. As this thought crossed his mind, a single, desperate plea for mercy echoed faintly in the opulent room. In response, Rufus smiled faintly. He looked down at the groveling man and agreed, telling him he would be given a chance for atonement. This sudden change of direction stunned the goatee man. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he questioned his young master, reminding him that their plan had been to present Clinton's crimes before his father. He, however, was ecstatic. Clinton looked up, his face beaming with sycophantic praise for Rufus's generosity and nobility. A righteous act, he claimed, that was beyond the reach of commoners. He then eagerly asked what he must do. Leaning back with an almost beatific expression, Rufus laid out his terms. The task would be difficult, he admitted, but if Clinton were to succeed, all of his past crimes would be forgiven forever. The promise of a full pardon was all Clinton needed to hear. He shouted his acceptance with glee, proclaiming he would do anything. Observing the man's desperation, Rufus noted that was the spirit and began to issue his command. He calmly issues his command to the kneeling magistrate. Clinton's mission is to exterminate the monsters plaguing Rogue Belt and save the town. Before Clinton can fully process the order, Rufus requests a pen and paper. The magistrate looks up, bewildered, questioning the very existence of monsters and dismissing the idea as mere peasant nonsense. The magistrate's skepticism is irrelevant. A memory surfaces of a younger Rufus, diligently writing as he considers his philosophy. If there are no monsters, he reasons, then the situation is even more favorable. The true purpose is to uphold the principle of noblesse oblige, to project the image of a noble who stands with the people in their time of need. Kneeling on the floor, Clinton Feu Serpent stares in disbelief at the list of demands before him. Personnel, weapons, ships, ammunition. The sheer scale of the request is staggering. A single sheet of paper is dropped unceremoniously beside it. He looks up, sweating, muttering that it's impossible. But the order is absolute. He is to use bribes or back channels, whatever it takes to gather everything. They leave tomorrow morning. The source of the command becomes clear. Carlos looms over the magistrate, the tip of a blade held threateningly close. Nearby, the young Rufus lay lightless watches with his arms crossed. Carlos informs Clinton that if he cannot comply, he can simply die here. Terrified, Clinton scrambles to his feet, promising to prepare everything at once. As they depart, the young master turns to his butler, questioning the look on his face. Carlos simply addresses him with his formal title. The older man, visibly flustered, can only wonder to himself where the boy learned such wicked tactics. Later, standing by a window, Rufus asks Carlos if he intends to report his actions to his father. He points out that since they already snuck out, it's a bit late for that. Carlos quietly concedes the point. He then asks Carlos to stay with him a while longer, stating with confidence that his father will judge based on results. With a bow, the loyal butler accepts the command. His back turned, Rufus's resolve hardens. He is the only one who can act. Assuming the cause of the poor fishing already exists, he will use whatever he can, even dirty money, to see his mission through. The next morning, the focus shifts to the coastal town of Roquebel. The sun rises over the seaside settlement, its buildings clustered against the cliffs. On the shores of a coastal town, a woman and a small child stand near the trees, gazing out at the vast, empty sea. The child points with glee, exclaiming at how huge and numerous the approaching objects are, while her mother looks on with an expression of pure shock. On the horizon, a fleet of massive sailing ships cuts through the waves, their white sails brilliant under the midday sun. Watching the vessels from the tree-line, a young man with a dark bandana wonders aloud if nobles are attacking from the sea this time. He cries out in alarm and immediately sprints down the hill toward the woman and child. He reaches the little girl, Full, who seems to have fallen. Crouching beside her, he asks with concern if she's hurt and can walk. The girl simply confirms her name. His face breaks into a wide, proud grin. He praises her for being strong, declaring that's what it means to be a kid from Roquebel. He then turns to lead the mother and child away, telling them it's time for a game of hide and seek and that they shouldn't let anyone from outside the village find them. After seeing them off, he pauses, his expression hardening into a grim stare as he looks back toward the approaching fleet. Now perched on a rooftop with a long staff in hand, he steels himself. He doesn't care if they are nobles or not. They will not set foot on this land. He vows that this time, he will protect everyone. The fleet comes to a stop, anchoring in the waters just off the coast of the port town, Roquebel. A small boat cuts through the calm waters, carrying Rufus Lightless and his butler, Carlos. The older man breaks the silence, remarking that they had never intended to come back, but it seems fate is intent on dragging them back to this place. Rufus, gazing toward the shore with a weary expression, agrees that it's a nuisance, but acknowledges they will need someone familiar with these waters. As their boat approaches the wooden pier, they can see a lone figure standing guard. Rufus observes that the locals seem wary of them. He remains unconcerned, however, thinking to himself that once the people of the town see their faces, things should settle down. On the wooden pier, Greg greets Rufus with a broad, relieved smile. He notes that Rufus is the first to arrive, questioning his sudden disappearance the previous day and his unannounced return. As they speak, Carlos steps forward, placing a hand on Rufus's shoulder. He explains to a bewildered Greg that they have come to handle the source of the problem preventing the villagers from paying their taxes, the monsters. Greg finds the situation sudden and confusing, asking if Rufus brought his entire fleet just for monster extermination. With a confident smile, Rufus clarifies his goal is not petty extermination, but total annihilation of every last creature. He advises the villagers to simply stay hidden. He scratches his head, admitting that until yesterday he'd hated all nobles, but now sees Rufus is different. Greg then asks why he cares so much for their village. Rufus replies cryptically, suggesting it's likely because he strangled a rare, talking snake. Their conversation is abruptly cut short as a figure charges down the pier towards them. It is the Roquebel protector, wielding a long staff and shouting about the snake Rufus mentioned. Greg whirls around in shock. The protector brings his staff down in a powerful overhead strike aimed at Rufus. Before it can land, Carlos intercepts, drawing two blades to block the blow. Rufus sharply commands him to stop. With swift efficiency, the butler disarms the attacker. The wooden staff is knocked from the protector's hands, sent flying before shattering against the pier's planks as the young man stumbles forward. Thrown off balance, the protector continues his forward momentum, his eyes wide with surprise. Rufus watches his approach with a sharp, unwavering gaze. He lunges past the butler, his silhouette clashing with Rufus's in a blur of motion. From the side, Carlos cries out in alarm, shouting for his young master. But the young master stands his ground. With his head slightly bowed, Rufus calmly states that he is fine and orders Carlos not to interfere. He met the protector's wide-eyed shock with a cold, unwavering stare, a trace of blood on his lower lip. Internally, he conceded a misstep, he had gotten overconfident. His opponent quickly assessed the situation. He recognized the chilling killing intent in the young noble, an aura no child should possess. Full recounted how Rufus had charged from afar, displayed incredible agility, and had aimed directly for their leader. As the protector stood his ground, Greg rushed forward, bellowing in disbelief. He furiously demanded to know what the idiot, Full, was doing attacking the very person who had saved their village. Rufus, meanwhile, observed the unfolding drama, questioning the title of savior. The accusation seemed to confirm a suspicion for Full. "That's right," he murmured, a sudden understanding dawning on him. "I figured as much." A new determination settled in his eyes. "In that case," Full declared with a sharp grin, "that's all the more reason we can't let you into the village." Rufus met the hostility with a placid smile, remarking on the ungrateful reception for savior. Unfazed, he raised a hand. "Very well," he conceded, "I'll hear you out." Greg pleads with a young man named Full to stop, while another attendant asks Greg not to interfere. But Full ignores them, shouting that it's not enough as he lunges toward Rufus lay lightless. He accuses Rufus of tricking the villagers, a charge Rufus calmly questions as he plants his foot, noting how much everyone has changed. The young man's assault is relentless, yet Rufus dodges each blow with ease. Full grows increasingly frustrated, exclaiming that in just one day, even his own father and Lilia are calling Rufus a good noble. He can find no opening in the young lord's defense. His frustration mounting, Full throws a wide, telegraph swing, determined not to be fooled again. Rufus sidesteps it effortlessly. Having created distance, Rufus challenges his attacker, stating that he drove off the corrupt tax collectors. If that doesn't make him a good noble, he demands to know what does. He presses the point, looking directly at the flustered villager and asking plainly, "What exactly is a good noble?" Faced with the direct question, Full hesitates before stammering out a suggestion. Perhaps it's someone who doesn't collect taxes. His uncertain answer hangs in the air between them as they stand facing one another on the quiet shoreline. The silence is broken by a single, firm step. Rufus scoffs at the idea, calling it idiotic. He advances on Full, who is startled by the sudden movement. Rufus declares that he will teach him the truth, questioning if Full believes that roads and bridges simply spring up from nothing. A good noble, he begins to explain, is something entirely different. His words are punctuated by a sudden, swift motion. Rufus leaps into the air and delivers a powerful kick to Full's torso, shouting that what the villagers truly want is not a good noble, but simply one that is convenient for them. The impact sends Full flying backward. As Full is sent reeling, Rufus stands composed, his mind already analyzing the fight. He concludes that Full is no ordinary person. His movements are unnatural. Despite this, he is confident that he has now gauged his opponent's limits. He stood over the defeated villager as his companions approached. Greg, unimpressed, remarked on the boy's lack of manners. Carlos offered a potential explanation, noting that Full was the youngest of three brothers and perhaps a bit spoiled. But on the ground, Full's mind was consumed by a single, burning thought, a command not to forgive. The thought spiraled into a painful memory. A young girl, Lun, stood amidst chaos, her face a mask of sorrow as she questioned if he had forgotten her. The memory was a litany of hatred, a vow to never forgive Clinton, never forgive the name Lightless, and never forgive the nobility as a whole. Fueled by this resurrected rage, Full began to push himself back to his feet. He rose, his eyes blazing with renewed fury as he faced Rufus. He spat the words, "good noble," with contempt, proclaiming that all nobles were nothing but scum. With a roar, he lunged, swinging his staff in a vicious arc that Rufus barely managed to evade. As they exchanged blows, Rufus was taken aback by the villagers' surprising resilience. He began to wonder if Full possessed mana. The realization struck him as their dance of combat continued. Full was reinforcing his body with magic. Planting his foot firmly, Rufus prepared his counter. Suddenly, a monstrous, dark aura exploded from Full. Rufus could only stare in momentary shock before a fist, empowered by this strange magic, slammed into the side of his face. Over the water, two figures are sent flying towards a wooden pier, propelled by an unseen force. As the villager Full looks on in shock, Rufus unleashes a spell, shouting its name, Dark Hand. A massive, shadowy hand erupts from below and smashes into the pier, splintering the wood. He lands deftly amidst the destruction, his long coat billowing behind him as dust and smoke clears. His moment of composure is brief, replaced by a flicker of irritation as Carlos calls out to him. He thinks to himself that he was forced to use magic. He turns his attention to his butler, noticing the scrapes on the older man's face. After a moment's silence, Rufus states plainly that Carlos needs healing. With a stern expression, he issues a command. More martial training is to be added to his study schedule. As Rufus walks away with Greg, Carlos watches them go, understanding that his young master truly hates to lose. The two of them, Rufus and Greg, proceed down a long wooden dock that stretches out over the water. As they walk, Greg apologizes for the actions of their fool, Full. Rufus dismisses the apology, remarking that Full is a lucky bastard. Had this happened yesterday, he would have cut him clean in two. His gaze drifts as he considers something. He asks Greg if it's true that the commoners, like the young men who are out hunting monsters, can't even use magic. Greg answers with a proud grin, explaining that even without Full, they're all capable fighters. He suggests Rufus think of it as their way of thanking him for saving the village, and even offers to let Rufus take his own son on the upcoming cleanup operation if the boy is willing. The offer leaves Rufus momentarily surprised. He responds to the offer with aristocratic coolness, stating that it is only natural for commoners to labor for nobles and that Greg shouldn't flatter himself. The man is taken aback, wondering if Rufus has entered some kind of contrary Tsundere mode. He turns his head slightly, adding as if it were an afterthought that, of course, they will be paid for their services. The man's expression brightens instantly. With a confident wink, Greg declares that now they're talking, and that he's counting on the young noble. With the terms agreed upon, they proceed down the wooden pier. Carlos announces their immediate departure, instructing that everyone willing to fight be put on the ships right away. One of the commoners, already perched high on the dock's framework, looks down and remarks on their haste. Down on the bustling docks, with a grand sailing vessel waiting at sea, Carlos explains the mission to Rufus. The fleet is to begin a monster cleanup operation, and its success will allow the local fishing to resume. Rufus quietly agrees. The young man from the pier approaches and introduces himself as Rog, Greg's eldest son and the leader of the young men. He explains that the sea is their backyard and offers to be their guide. Rufus internally notes that Rog is taller than the local magistrate. Carlos remarks to Rufus that at least Rog is better than that shark-like brat. Rufus murmurs that the brat always bites first, prompting an irritated Carlos to demand what he means by that. Their conversation is cut short by a figure blocking their path. It is Full, the young man from the village. Rog is shocked, asking why Full isn't back in the village. Full glares at Rufus, calling him a damn black bean sprout, and asking if he thought he could run away. He grins with wild confidence, explaining that one thing led to another, and he managed to catch up to them, having apparently ridden a sea creature to the docks. He refused to accept the outcome of their previous confrontation, declaring to Rufus that their fight was not yet over. Rog stood by, listening as Full insisted that Rufus had lost by a ring out. Rufus's expression soured at the accusation. Full vehemently argued that the shadowy hand Rufus had used was a clear violation of the rules, and therefore, the outcome was invalid. Dismissing the complaint as ridiculous, Rufus turned his gaze toward the open sea, the ship now well offshore. He stated coolly that anyone who failed to follow his orders was useless, and commanded someone to throw the insubordinate boy overboard. Instead of showing fear, Full broke into a wide, toothy grin. With a laugh, he declared his complete agreement with the command. His strange confidence was immediately explained as the lid of a nearby barrel flew open. A young boy, another stowaway, popped out with a look of alarm, shouting for his big brother. His sudden appearance brought the execution of the order to an abrupt halt.